Everybody, I'm Megan, I'm the festival director. I just want to say a quick hello, and I am so stoked because this is the first time we've ever had a group of high school students at Words and Music. So, y'all give it up for Noka. Thank you for being here. Thank you to their teachers for bringing them. All right, so hopefully this will be an incentive for y'all when you graduate to come and experience the festival as well. Anytime you register for a session, you are automatically entered to win a $25 gift card to Community Book Center. Welcome. We do that because when we moved into this space, we've been in this space for 3 years now, but we've been operating the festival since 2018. So since 2018, we've had a very long established relationship with Tubby & Coo's Traveling Bookshop. That's the bookshop you're going to find right out there in the lobby. They have all the books of all the people you will see on this stage and that stage for the next few days. But when we moved into this space in 2023, we moved in next door to the oldest Black-owned bookstore in the city, Community Book Center. So if we're going to be in this space and on this stage, we've got to support next door as well. So to do that, we encourage everyone to go buy books from Tubby & Coo's, and then go next door and buy more books. And to help you, we've entered you into winning a gift card to Community Book Center. And our winner for this session is Andrea Neighbors. Andrea? Going once, going twice? All right. The great news is I have a randomizer. I'm going to randomize another one. All right. Randomly drawing Milos Dijak? Milos? Try one more time. And then we're just going to let y'all fight for it. Susan Kagan? This is why you don't get here late. Alfredo Perez? Hey! There we go! I will bring you your gift card so that you don't have to go through these steps. On that happy note, I am going to get out of the way and let the gentleman do his thing. I'm going to hand it over to Danny Cherry Jr. He'll be your moderator for the afternoon.
How y'all doing, everybody? My name is Danny Cherry Jr. and I'm a novelist, short story writer, and a journalist. We're here today to talk about magical realism, speculative fiction, all that good stuff. And we're here today with Marguerite Sheffer, Bryan Camp, and Desiree Evans. So before we get things started, we're going to go ahead and we're going to go down the line, and I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves to you, like what they published, where it's been published, and then we're going to get straight to the questions. So, yeah, start with you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name again is Marguerite Sheffer. I write fiction exclusively. I write genre fiction mostly, which is what we're going to talk about today. I write science fiction, fantasy, kind of borderline weird stuff as well, a teeny bit of horror, even though I'm very squeamish. And my first book came out almost exactly a year ago. It's a collection of short stories called The Man in the Banana Trees, which has stories that are unlinked across all of those genres. And it won the Iowa Short Fiction Award, so I was very happy with that. And I've published short fiction in Asimov Science Fiction, The Cosmic Background, Bomb, a few other places, but I'm happy to be here and talk to you about it.
Hey everybody, my name is Desiree Evans. I am a Louisiana-born writer. I write fiction, nonfiction, poetry, a little bit of everything. I also dabble across age groups. I write from middle grade and adult audiences, mostly speculative fiction as well. Sci-fi, fantasy, and my debut anthology, which came out last year, is a horror fiction anthology. And so I'm really excited to talk about that today. A little bit about horror fiction, writing for horror and writing for teen audiences. But yeah, I am really excited to be here. I also have short fiction published across the internet and poetry as well. Google me and find me there. Thank you so much.
My name is Bryan Camp. I mostly write fantasy sort of stuff. I have two novels. Murder mysteries set in New Orleans where the gods of different mythologies all exist. I have one published short story. I have published two novels in order to publish one short story. So that's not economical, but yeah, that's me.
Awesome. My first question is, I think it's best to start off with some definitions for magical realism and speculative fiction. So my question to the panel is, what separates magical realism from fantasy and speculative fiction from sci-fi?
Not answering say magical realism from fantasy, and what was that one?
Speculative fiction from sci-fi.
Okay. I can take speculative fiction and sci-fi. Speculative fiction is kind of an umbrella term that really actually evolved in the last 15, 20 years or so as a term that's kind of a catch-all for all forms of what I call is anything that diverges from the real. You know, when you think of kind of the realist things that are said to happen in the real world. And so that can include magical realism, that can include sci-fi, fantasy, horror, the gothic. There's all, oh my god, the umbrella is huge. Dystopian, weird fiction. There's just so much that goes under there. And if you are interested in anything kind of on that kind of terrain, what you call the speculative or the unreal, you'll find a place. But yeah, so it's kind of an umbrella term where sci-fi is a particular type of speculative fiction. It usually has to do with like advancing technologies that are not current now, but could be in a believable future. You think about robots, you think about AI, you think about, and even a lot of the ideas you think about now as the norm, some science fiction writer at one point thought, like the internet. At one point that was a science fiction idea, and that was, we writers are writing about that 40, 50 years before the internet actually came up, And so anything that kind of goes along that kind of technological terrain, think of as science fiction.
So magical realism and what was
Speculative fiction.
speculative fiction, right? So if I were to take a fairly cynical view of it, magical realism is any fantasy written by someone from Central and South America that college professors will let you read, kind of thing. I have a kind of a jaundiced view, I think, of genre terminology. So in terms of like magical realism or what's the difference between magical realism and speculative fiction? Well, often it's whether literature says that it's if you have like elves in it or something, then if you're reading it in an undergraduate class, well now it's magical realism because we have elevated the genre, but if it's just something you're reading on your own, then it's speculative fiction.
I think a lot of those terms have a lot of weight of, who is using the terms, what countries are using the terms, the idea of the colonizers' gaze upon the terms, so a lot of those are weighted, histories as well, even within the idea of the genre space, right? And so magical realism, as Ryan's referring to, is often used to refer to works by, authors that could be in the Caribbean or Latin America, who, to us, to a Western gaze, would use unreal or magical pieces in their kind of everyday writing. But if you interview some of those writers, they're like, it's just how we see the world. We don't even think about it as magical. This is how we grew up. And a lot of you can work about black writers today, would be like, it's not magical realism, you might call that, but we just kind of, this is just how we grew up, this is how we think of spirituality, this is how it appears to us in our world. But the Western gaze might label that as magical, right? Or magical thinking, or magical realism. And so these terms are kind of weighted by history and by the kind of the current social construction we think of today. But we can dig more into that too later, but yeah, all of that history.
I don't really have much to add because I totally agree with those definitions, but I do want to kind of reinforce some things that were said. I think what Desiree said about there is a place for your work out there. That's why I love the speculative term, because when I'm sitting down to my writing desk, which is too rare, I'm not thinking, okay, today I'm going to write my magically realist story, or today I'm going to write my horror story. I'm just writing. And I think that even in the years I've been writing, which is not that long, a lot of those strict genre walls have fallen down. And literary magazines I've seen change their policies and be more open to speculative fiction. MFA programs are changing, which is really exciting. When I started, I specifically went to an MFA program that said it was welcoming to speculative fiction. It was really, really rare. And that's changing. And Alex Jennings, who was mentioned earlier, teaches at one of those programs. I was going to say something else. But I think the nice thing is that as a writer, I don't have to think about it. as a reader, sometimes it helps me find work that I'm excited about, but the genre labels aren't what gets me excited and going. And I think the world is becoming more friendly to the weird and the unsettling and the what if, and caring less about if it fits these rigid boxes. I think we're also seeing like romantasy and like the mixing of genres, which is really exciting.
I think there's also, so it's interesting that you say that like we're kind of opening, you know, up to certain things. But I think at a certain point we decided to be more rigid because if you look at a lot of like classic literature, that's very speculative. I mean, like, you know, in Jane Eyre, when she knows, like, she just knows that Rochester is in the fire, like, because she hears his voice from, like, that's, you know, that's fantastical thinking. But you know, there's all kinds of different, you know, a ghost shows up in Hamlet, you know, and it's like, it's not a metaphor, it's not in, like, it's his dead father, you know. So, but we don't call that a horror play, but it is, you know.
I think that's such a great point. Like this recent, the policing of genre has actually been a recent development. Yeah.
Awesome. So my next question for y'all is, what is y'all's approach to creating worlds, settings that lends themselves to the realm of the fantastical? Or to put another way, how do you weave the ordinary with the extraordinary?
Okay, I'll go first. So the ordinary with the extraordinary. I think you just have to look at the world not head on, right? You have to kind of see the world in a way that is with potential, you know? It's very easy for me to be very cynical and say like, well, this is why things are. But there's always that part of my brain that's like, well, what if, right? And so it's very, I think grounding the magical in the real is like, so I don't want to get too into like, you know, tabletop role-playing games and stuff like that, but like if you make it like very, like there are rules for how magic works and there are like definitions for things, well then it starts to become that, was it Clark who said that, you know, any advanced science is magic and vice versa. But so I'm not advocating for that necessarily, but I think that if you have some kind of, if you ask like the next question, right? So if you have some kind of idea about like how your magic works or why this is this way, right? So we live in a world where there are dragons. Okay, fine, sure. So then like you ask, you don't just leave it at that where there's just complete, you know, it's just complete whimsy, unless that's the kind of story you're writing. But to kind of say, to kind of like ground it and weave them together, if you have this kind of, you ask the next question, right? So how does that complicate people's lives? You know, who deals with the dragons, right? And so then you end up with Peter S. Beagle's most recent novel, where he's a dragon exterminator, right? And so you have this kind of like, you know, you end up with dragons in your like a worm infestation in your ductwork, and you need to hire this guy to come clean them out, right? So that's how you have to ask the next question. It's not enough to just be like, well, there's magic here, but then what next?
Yeah, so yeah, you know, it's a good question. I've tried to write kind of straight up realist fiction when I'm doing anything, and love the realist fiction. And everyone will always comment during workshop, you know, I feel like there's something a little bit magical. And I'm like, maybe it's just how I see the world. And so I'm like, maybe I should just kind of go into that more, go into that deeper. But I think in a lot of ways, you know, one of my favorite science fiction writers, Octavia Butler, who I think definitely inspired me to become a writer, often said about science fiction is like there are no doors, there are no boundaries. And I feel like that's what writing for me is like as well. The speculative needs to go up because that's the world that I'm writing from, that's the world that the character is living from. Let your characters guide you. When you're sitting down to write a story, you're brainstorming all the young writers in here who might be here who are thinking about doing this as a career, you know, congrats, join us. But just like, listen to what your characters are telling you, let them talk to you. That might be a little bit sensitive too, right? Let your characters guide you into what the world is that they're living in, what will best explain and maybe put your character through enough that it makes a story, right? And so maybe that's a magical world, maybe that's a realist world, maybe that's a world where, you know, there are dragons, there is a magical courtyard, if there is something that is going to be a challenge to your character in a certain way. A lot of the writing that I do, I love folklore, I love folklore and history, and that kind of bubbles up in my writing in a lot of ways. So I kind of write in universe, I call it the Black Fantastic, which is the history of Africa and African diasporic storytelling traditions that in many ways I feel have a natural kinship to this idea that there are no wars, you know, between like the real and the unreal in a lot of the writing, that historical writing. People would say, oh, there was no Black science fiction or fantasy writers until 20 years ago, you know, Rogaine Octavia, or then what, you know, these other kind of more recent writers. And I'm like, you know, particularly Black folk in the Americas have been writing into perspective since we got here. Our oral stories, our histories, our folklore. The idea of even imagining ourselves free was an beautiful act of Afrofuturist and speculative storytelling. You know, basically before Harriet Tubman, you know, did her first grade, she would tell folks, we are free. I believe that we were free. I had a dream that we were free. And this was before they were free, right? This was before they got anywhere near the North. But you know, this idea of declaring it as this idea of reality that she had saw in her dream, that was to me, a beautiful act of speculative storytelling that imagined a different future. And so I think I really love writing in that tradition, envisioning worlds where Black folk are alive and real, because a lot of the historic, you know, kind of Western storytelling didn't see us as futures. Didn't see us riding dragons or having magical adventures. And so I'm kind of thinking about how to use those tools to reframe that idea of Black folks into the future and into magical, fantastical worlds. And a lot of ways the book that I wrote last year was one act of kind of talking back to the genre where, you know, oftentimes Black young girls and Black women were not seen as survivors in that genre. We were kind of like the sassy best friend who got killed off early, or like, you know, or the kind of a magical friend who gave you wise advice before you went on your own adventure. So that idea of imagining the Black girl as a survivor in that story was, to me, a kind of speculative act, but also a declaration that we deserve to be in these stories and survive.
So wonderful. I think to answer the question, I've been thinking a lot. I think I'm really a daydreamer, and a lot of my stories start out without really being pieces that are for my career. They're really just daydreams and thoughts. And often they're really escapist when they start, because there's a lot of things going on in the world that cause me rage and fear and horror that I find really hard to look directly at. So when I start writing a story, it's often to escape those things, but then the subconscious works its magic, and it ends up making its way back in. And I know the idea of a distorted mirror, or a black mirror, like the TV show, comes up a lot in my work, or like that thing I didn't want to look at actually ends up being the juice of the story, and it comes back in full force. To give a quick example, the first story in my collection, The Man in the Banana Trees, is called Ricky, and it started out being a funny story about a Muppet who goes to an urban high school. I was a teacher for 10 years. And the basic idea is that all these schools say they put students first, but if you actually put a Muppet, who I think is the embodiment of loving learning and curiosity and joy and kindness, if you actually dropped a Muppet in many of the schools I was working at, it would not go very well for anyone involved. Things would quickly devolve. And I don't want to give the story away, but it took some dark turns, and it actually ended up showing me some things that I believed about public education and what we owe to children. So I often don't go into a story knowing what I think yet, and writing helps me figure it out.
Thank you so much. So my next question is, so like I'd love to hear y'all's differing approaches. So like, let me see how to put this. How do your ideas typically come to you? And from there, what is your writing process like?
I'll do this one real quick, because I kind of just answered it. I have these daydreams, I have these ideas. My drafts start out so rough that they would be incomprehensible to anybody else. They're like lists, usually handwritten, maybe over a long period of time. And for me, it takes many drafts to figure out where I'm going with something. And for a short story, once I figure out the ending, what the ending beat is going to be, then I have to go back and rework the entire story. Then the actual work of editing and structuring and thinking like a writer begins. But finding the ending is like the search of the whole beginning process. And if you were to look at my Google Drive, you would see lots of flash fiction stories, so 1,000 words or less, that have been through 30 to 35 drafts. It's just a laborious process. Did I fully answer the question? Okay.
So I have the like, ooh, that's a really writer thing to say sort of answer, and then I have like the depressingly just like the work of being a writer is a constant thing sort of answer. So the first answer is in one of his afterwards, Stephen R. Donaldson talks about the collision of the familiar and the exotic. So you have all this stuff in the back of your head, and you know things, and you live your own life, and you have this kind of wealth of experience as a human being, and then something comes at you sideways, and then like those two things connect, and it sends you off in an into story, right? The novel that the book series that he's most known for is about, it's a portal fantasy. It's a guy who goes to this magic world and, is like the chosen one sort of thing in that world. But like what's really interesting about it is that he has leprosy. And so there's this kind of like Fisher King connection to the world sort of thing, where when he goes there, he becomes healed. I can't necessarily recommend these books for a variety of reasons. But for most of us, the exotic part would be the leprosy, right? Like we know portal fantasies, but most of us don't have lived experience with leprosy. But when he was a kid, his father was a doctor who treated people with this disease, and so he knew all about leprosy and how like a person afflicted with this has to move through the world. And so the familiar for him was the leprosy, and I forget exactly what it was that became the exotic for him, but that was the connection. That's my writer answer. I went into the bathroom at Carrollton Station, and I looked down at the urinal, and on the pipe fitting was stamped the name of the company that makes pipe fittings for urinals, and it was Regal Sloan. And I was like, that sounds like a name, and that's the name of one of the characters in my novel. So sometimes you just, sometimes the familiar and the exotic is this like big idea sort of stuff, and sometimes you just think of stuff while you're peeing. That's all I got.
Yeah, that's cool. I went to journalism school, so I always keep a handy notebook with me still to this day, and I love to interview my characters and ideas and my places that I go to sometimes. But I have like documents on my computer that just like names I really like. Like I hear a name or I think of an idea for a name, I just write it down in my document. But how do my stories come to me? It's kind of up here. I don't know. I tend to start with characters first. This is why I kind of do the character interviews, like, who are you? I kind of like who you are. What world are you in? What's your story? Tell me, and kind of dig into that. Stories often come to me like in moments of meditative peace, I guess, like when I'm riding in the car, looking at the trees, in the morning in the shower, like when you're studying there, like a whole novel will appear before my eyes. Early in the morning between dreams, so I have to always get my notebook and write down my ideas before I forget them. Kind of those kind of liminal spaces, I guess, what we call them today. Yeah, just always, if you're interested in writing, carry a notebook. You just like get ideas all the time and just jot them down. And sometimes those ideas you can piece them together into an actual story. I've definitely pieced together stories from 20 or 30 different ideas that I've had over a lifetime. But yeah, just, keep notes, things that intrigue you, things that appear to you, really cool places that you go to. You're like, ooh, I might want to write about a building that looks like this. I was walking around the corner earlier and I was like, ooh, these are ideas about buildings that I want in my next story. Just like if you're just watch and listen to dialogue, listen to people talk to each other to inspire a story sometimes. So just kind of making notes to yourself about cool dialogue you heard. Once I heard this really cool guy, was riding a bus, and this guy was talking about something, and these 2 words he said ended up inspiring the entire story I ended up writing. Had nothing to do about the guy or what he was talking about, but the 2 words put together sounded really cool in my head, and that ended up inspiring the story. It's just, they come from like really strange, fun places. It's just, a lot of it is about me listening, observing, and thinking about the world and the places I love to go, and thinking about what stories can appear in those places.
So something you said made me think of something. I have to kind of manufacture this these days, right? Because a part of where all of this comes from, I think, for us is boredom, right? You need a space to daydream, and like you, when you're driving, when you're in the shower, right? Those are places where, and I know I'm old and there's a bunch of young people in the front, but like you need to put your phone down, right, for these things to happen. You need to be somewhere where the only thing you have is the stories in your head, right? And I find, and I don't know if this is true for y'all, but I imagine it probably is, I have to manufacture these spaces for myself now, because if I bring a book with me almost everywhere I go, but sometimes I don't use that. But if I'm like standing in line somewhere, it's so easy to just pull out my phone and distract myself. But like you need to not be distracted. You need to be distracted in a different way in order to overhear the conversation, or be actually looking at the building or stuff like that. So.
I'm really glad you mentioned that. I find that so true. I have a newborn at home right now, and I find it's horrible for my writing time, but when I can't do anything else with my hands for hours, that's when an idea will come, and I'm like, oh, please remember, please remember, please remember, because I know I'm gonna lose it. But I get so many ideas just sitting there with my hands unable to touch a phone. I should.
Record it. Yeah.
That's a great idea. And you guys made me think of something else too that I wanted to say, which is that I really struggle with perfectionism. I don't know if anyone here feels the same. But a big learning I've had over the last few years is just to embrace the bad ideas and to sit with them longer. And I think for me, embracing my creativity, which sounds so corny, has been a journey not of having better ideas. It's not that I'm in the shower or walking or whatever and I'm like, there it is, that's the idea that's gonna be the bestseller. That never happens. What does happen is I just sit there with bad ideas and I keep going, and I keep going, and I keep listing more ideas, and I keep going, and I keep going. And by not shutting it down early or forcing my ideas to make any sense or be any good, that's where the good stuff comes from. That really surprises me and I'm like, ooh, there's something there.
Okay, so we just talked about how y'all got ideas in your writing process. So now you have your fantastical world, and my question is, how do you create characters that fit into this world that you just created and that have this symbiotic relationship with the setting you just created?
For me, again, I think about that question of who can, writing from most of us are writing from a protagonist, from a kind of if we're writing fantasy, we're a hero, from our hero's story, right? In many ways, and you're thinking about who can bring out particular qualities in the character that you're writing about, whether you're writing from the first person point of view or third person close point of view. You're thinking about who can challenge the character, who can bring the most interesting moments to the story on the page by interacting with those characters. And of course, you're thinking about those obstacles that are going to happen along the way between who the character is that you introduce to the story and where you want to be by the end of the story, right? And so having an array of friends and foes and allies and just kind of maybe other kind of weird just characters who are there to kind of pepper the journey with exciting moments is kind of how I think about it. I often think about, because I write a lot of for younger audiences, which could be middle grade or middle adult audiences, I really love peppering those stories with kind of like, who's their crew? Who's their ride or die into this adventurous, crazy reality that they're about to go on to in this story. And so, who's the bestie or the frenemy, or who's the potential love interest, maybe in a young adult setting? Who is the enemy? whether it's an actual villain type archetype character or whether it's some sort of institutional force that is going to be the kind of antagonist in the story, I think about who can be their ride or die with them into that next level. But it's one of my favorite parts of the story. It's kind of thinking about the team of players that can really be on the character side in those moments.
I write pretty premise-driven fiction, so I don't start with characters. I try to figure them out after I know what the story is happening. But what I do think about is once I have a what if or some kind of challenge that's at the core of the story, I think about whose feet would be most held to the fire by this, who has the most to lose, or maybe not the most to lose, but who would be most stretched by this decision or this development, right? Like who is really pushed to the brink of themselves by whatever this premise is. And that can take some time, but then I have to get to know the characters, which is its own journey. But yeah, I tend to think about, okay, who has the hardest choice to make given X?
I have such a long game, so like I know the next 10 things I want to write. So thinking of like where do I start with is really kind of a difficult thought at this point. So I don't know necessarily whether I always start with a premise or a world or a character or a voice or things like that. So it would probably be a lot more specific for me to like try to think of. So like the novella that I'm like sending around to publishers now, that started off with a D&D voice for a D&D character that I was playing. And so when I sat down and started writing this whole world that I had kind of thought of, I was like, well, who's going to tell this story? And so this voice was in my head, and it's basically just me doing a bad Val Kilmer, Doc Holliday impression. But I think a lot of the place I like to start with, in terms of like thinking about character, any given world, there are two kinds of people. There's the people that the world just hands, right? Like, oh, you need something here, right? Problems, that's for other people, right? So there are people like that in any given world. And then there's the other people, right, that the world takes every opportunity to crap on, right? And I try to think about what those people look like in both extremes, because like the average person is usually more towards the crapped on side in any given world, and it's that's kind of like the perspective. But it's really easy to just kind of immediately villainize the people who get stuff handed to them. But it's also, like, I think important to think about, like, what is their life like, and what do they contribute to the world? Are they valid, or would the world be better off without them? I mean, I know the answer in our world, but that's a different conversation. So like we have the chosen ones, we have the kings, we have the monarchs, we have the whatever you want to call the archetypes. Do they actually have conflict in this world, or are all their problems taken care of? Or are their problems interesting too? And then you have the really crapped on people. Like, do they have any sort of agency? Do they have any sort of ability to interact with their world? Or do I need to find somebody who's going to come knock down the high and bring up the low, or some other sort of conflict?
Thank you very much for those answers. I really like that, hearing y'all's different approaches. I know for myself, I start with all my ideas come with character first, and then I actually build the world around that character, whether it's my short fiction or my novels that I write, which allows me to segue to my next question. How does your approach differ from when you're writing long form fiction versus short form fiction or short stories?
I wish I knew this answer. I'm working on it. No, I think I'm working on a novel right now, and I think I am having to unlearn a lot of things that writing short fiction has taught me. I write very short fiction very often. I write flash a lot of the time. And the tendency towards brevity, or to getting to the answer as fast as possible, or to ramping up the tension fiction. I've trained my muscles really well to do that automatically. And I think with novels, I'm learning that they can linger in really magical ways. I was such a big Madeline L'Engle and C.S. Lewis fan growing up. Those are some magical books for me. And I think some of my favorite scenes from those Narnia books are not when they're fighting a beast or anything. It's when they're like drinking spiced wine and hanging out together and like you get the descriptions of the food. So I think learning how to linger well is something that I'm needing to learn right now. And to teach myself, I'm going back to reread a lot of novels that I really, really love and trying to just incept my brain with that different approach because I've been in the world of short fiction for so long. I think in development, I have to put the novel away for long periods of time to see it with fresh eyes, whereas short fiction can kind of barrel through a little bit more. But the novel, I need to take long breaks away from it because I get a little lost in the sauce with the novel pretty easily. It's so hard to hold it all in my brain at the same time. But I want to hear from folks who finished novels so I can learn how to do it.
So this is a pretty easy but unfortunate answer for me, which is I can't write short stories. Every time I try to write a short story, it turns into something much bigger. So just for an example, the cutoff for a novella is 40,000 words. And so I was like, well, I want to make a very short, like I want to write something short because the novel that I'm also sending out to publishers is massive. So I was like, I want to write something very short. Like it might even be a short story. And then the novella is 39,000 words. So I was like, I barely made it under 9. I'm just like, well, I guess it's a novel now too. So I'll actually talk to the more practical side of how this works for me. Usually when I get an idea, I start to think about how, I build it up and like, what's the conflict and what's the story and what's the voice, and then I start to like think about, well, who's telling the story and to whom are they telling the story, and how does it matter and how is that relevant? And then I start to kind of write, and I just kind of work until I start to get into a point where I write until I get to a point where essentially I'm juggling too many balls, and I need to have some kind of an outline, essentially. So that's usually around 20,000 words or so. And now I have a huge whiteboard in my office at home, and I make it look like a murder board. Essentially, my wife has more than once, like literally just backed out of the room because it looks like a beautiful mind up there. But yeah, so then I have a program called Scrivener, which lets you, you can do the same thing with Google Docs essentially, now that they have like the tabs on the side and stuff. But I write, I figure out like what the outline is, what the scenes are, who the characters, who the voices are in each the point of view characters in the various chapters, and then I just kind of, I label it all out and I write it. I have to be linear. I hear that there are writers who can like just bounce around and stuff. And I write the scene that's most interesting to me, and then I just bounce around and then I put all the pieces together. I'm like, that sounds wonderful, but it also is absolutely impossible for me. I'm somebody who thinks like, the previous chapter has to be done before I can move on to the next thing, and then the next thing, and then the next thing, which usually means it takes me years to write a book. Yeah, that's a thing.
Short stories versus the novel. Oh my gosh. I have often been told in critique and in workshops, your story, this could be a novel, which is great to hear sometimes, but also it just means that I tend to I love world building. I love being in the universe of a story. And so a lot of my work, a lot of my short fiction, I think can be novels or part of larger works. So for me, writing short fiction is very hard. I think it's something that I'm still trying to master. Even after taking many classes and teaching, all these things. Writing a full story that's a full, complete arc that feels done in 3,000 to 5,000 words It's actually really hard. And I think that's something, particularly if you write long, if you like to linger. I love writing food moments. I love those moments of lingering in a place, in a world, in a small moments, which you are often made to cut when you're writing a short story because of brevity. The economy of words, which is something you're really thinking about as you're trying to, and it's a beautiful skill to learn because once you master that, you can really tell stories well. You can really master the short story form. One of the things I work with a lot of amazing best-selling, writers in the YA fantasy and horror spaces as part of this collection. Most of them are novelists, and most of them did not know how to write short stories. So one of the biggest things of just working with them is how do you turn some of these ideas which were really great novels, but they can't really work in the short story space. And so we have like a limit of 5,000 words. Ooh, it was hard for a lot of them because they're so used to building universes and to building amazing worlds, even in contemporary settings. They're so used to being able to go linger for many times, particularly with young characters, having them linger in conversations, and these really kind of cute moments that are really fun to read, but like 5,000 words, you really can't do that. And so, a lot of that was back to back, going back and forth with just trying to get them to kind of learn that, like, what are the moments that are really important? Can we reverse outline the story and pick up moments that are just unnecessary, cutting those out, just kind of so learning those kind of moments and how do you edit to refine into 5,000 words, that is 8,000 words. 3,000 words is a lot to cut in a story. And so thinking about how do you refine that story in a lot of ways. So it's a challenge, but I think if you do practice it and master it, it'll help you to grow out and learn to build a novel next. I think that's a really key thing. Because in a novel, you can do what you do in a short story, but let it out to 50,000 words, right? Let it breathe, let those moments air out into that kind of story arc.
You reminded me of something else. I started my first book. It started out as a short story. It was an assignment in an undergraduate fiction class at Southeastern. It was the weekend of Katrina, and I thought I would be back in class the next week, so I was like, well, I gotta write this short story. And then 15 years later, I sold it. And I spent 15 years writing that story again and again and again. Right? But I was learning how to write a novel. But the thing that really changed it, the thing that really went from this is a novel that I need to rewrite again, this is a novel that's getting rejected by agents, but like encouragingly rejected by agents, that sort of thing, was my agent, when he sent it back to me and said, write another version of it, he said, start it as in the point that you can't not start it, right? The shortest version of the story is the one that you should tell. And so, the main character is a demigod. He doesn't know his father is, but he's, half god, half human. And that was like something I had been saving for like the halfway point in the book. It was always this point where it was like, there's this reveal, and like, your father's a god, dun, 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 that sort of thing. And I moved it up to literally page 1, and that's the version of the book that's sold. And so, regardless of whether it's a novel or a short story, I think the concept of, start the story with as much of the story already having happened as you possibly can, because that's the way to actually get to an end of the story, I guess.
Yeah, I was doing actually editing workshop for Danny's organization for American Lit, and one of the things I told was just like, start as close to the blood as possible into that moment. If you start writing a short horror story, where do I start the story? You can linger on the wallpaper for a long time, but that's not where the story is. And so like going to where the blood and bone is.
See how she said that like way shorter than I did?
Danny, would you answer this question? Because you write both.
So I find that my process differs as, like, I'm gonna put this, so for my novels, I have to outline, and with an outline, I actually do what Bryan said that he doesn't, I bounce around. So for my second novel, I actually, I'm still working on it, but I wrote my ending first, and I'm just writing towards that. And like, I've just been bouncing around. I write whatever excites me, because I find writing is a lot about momentum. So I like to keep that momentum going, and then I worry about doing all the boring stuff later. So I write what excites me first. Whereas with my short stories, I write in a linear fashion because they're so short. You can you know, if it's not working, you can just rewrite it again. Like if you go on my Google Drive, I have like upwards of like 10 different versions of like one short story, for example. So yeah, that's my answer. I write literally with short stories, and then I bounce around with my novels. So yeah. So I'm interested in like what genre writers inspire you, and then what is it about them that speaks to you?
Well, to start off with, N.K. Jemisin just was awarded, let me rephrase that. N.K. Jemisin was just earned the Grandmaster Award, or title, I don't know exactly what to call it. I like everything that woman has written, like even the books that other people don't necessarily know and talk about, like those are, I like those books too. What is it? Something like, so she has a novel, I forget, I think it's the first one in the Broken Earth trilogy, but I can't remember what the title is. But the first book in that trilogy, she does something with point of view that, as a writer, when I realized what she was doing, it was that Office gif of I have many questions. The first of which is, how dare you? I think that's really the point where I am as a writer and a reader, is craft. Right, the things that I like about the genre writers that I really like is the craft level stuff, and how they manage to put words together, how they manage to create this sense of reality within speculative, or how they manage to speculate about worlds that matter, that sort of stuff. Within that vein, Clive Barker is also really influential to me, again, from a kind of craft level. Other genre stuff. And then there's, I also like to, I'm also at the point where I'm trying to like go to other genres and find out how they do what they do, and bring it back to my stuff. So I love mysteries, obviously. But I don't read a lot of mysteries anymore, but that was a point in my life where I was reading a lot of mysteries. And now I'm at a point where I'm reading a lot of nonfiction to try to figure out how they do what they do and bring it back in. So I'm reading a lot of histories and stuff like that to try to think of like, how would a historian in this world think about this world and write about this world and that kind of stuff.
Oh gosh, this is a hard question because I love everything and I read everything. And I was the library was my second home when I was a little girl. It was like right down the street from my house, and this is where I loved. I was reading and imagining universes. So all that to say is that's one of the questions I could never answer because I love everybody. But I do think that what I love teaching in terms of I'm writing in a canon in a genre that has not always been good to Black writers, and so I love teaching the untold stories of that canon in many ways. And so I feel like a lot of those folks, they don't necessarily influence how I write or my writing per se, but they gave me permission and they gave me an ability to see myself in work. And so I mentioned Octavia Butler earlier. Even people who are not necessarily thought of to be secular writers, like Toni Morrison was a huge influence on me as a young girl. I think of the three N's: Nayla Hawkinson, N.K. Jemisin, and Lucy Shaw, all amazing Black writers who influenced me in my early 20s and 30s. I think of the array of contemporary Black women writers who kind of came out of that generation. Connie Dew, who wrote that forward to call it the King Mother of Black Horror, who was a forward to my collection. She was doing it when no one else was doing it. I mean, for 20, 30 years, she's been in the space as one of the only Black women writers who was able to break through in the top 5 publishing houses to be writing horror at a time in a genre that was not publishing us. Even though we were writing it, we weren't being published until very recently. And so it's a very much a new space, but I really would love to look at the voices of those who've been struggling in those spaces for many, many years before we see ourselves on the bookshelves. So yeah, I mean, gosh. And then there's so many writers coming out now, so you'll find some of them in this anthology they have their own novels coming out as well. Folks like in the young adult space, like Tracy Dion, who has an amazing series called Legendborn, who's kind of again taking the narratives of stories, she's kind of playing on Arthurian legends and again writing Black folk into spaces that we've never written into before. And I love seeing a lot of the kind of contemporary folks doing stories, doing like fairy tale retelling, or doing retellings, and but again adding diversity and voices of color, queer voices into spaces that have never been friendly to us before. And so it's really exciting time to, despite all the craziness that's happening around the fascist banning of books in libraries and in universities, because we don't want children to be exposed to the realities of the world. There's a really amazing movement in literature to actually allow voices that exist in the world to be able to tell their own stories. And so, I don't know, this is an amazing time to be writing right now. And to see in the horror space, writers like a American writer Stephen Baron Jones, who's been doing amazing work in the horror space, writers like Victor Laval getting recognized finally, finally getting recognized, and winning awards that they should have won 20 years ago, but finally being able to be like doing this work, and it's just a really exciting time. So I think publishing and kind of responding to this moment, pushing back against the kind of overwhelming desire to go back,
I'm so glad I'm going last because this is such a hard question. I feel like this could be a panel in and of itself. But y'all reminded me of some names while you were going. I have a real special place in my heart for historical speculative fiction, so fiction that reimagines the past using either by writing in magic or asking what if about the past. Some of my very favorite writers who do that and who are amazing and who I really hope you check out are Sophia Samatar, P. Jelly Clark, amazing, amazing writer. You can find many of these stories online. Ken Liu does this sometimes, and his collection is so beautiful. Ted Chiang also does this sometimes. And then one of my very favorite novelists, Susanna Clark, has written some historical speculative fiction. And I think craft-wise, when I think about novels that I really, really love in the genre space, they do that amazing, well, they have an amazing premise, so they're just dope from page one. But what they do that I'm really trying to learn from is they have all these threads that somehow magically really land well in the end. That kind of the feeling that all those mysteries and all those tangents have come together and just kicked you in the chest. So I think Susanna Clark's Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, I just reread it for maybe the 7th time, and it's an 800-page book, and it was a delight. I can't think of a more delightful way to read 100 pages, and it all comes together so beautifully in the end. Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie also has that kind of punch in the gut feeling, and I'm gonna go home and think of 10 more. I love the novels you guys mentioned, they're so good. But yeah, that punch in the gut I feel like that's always my goal with a short story, and I'm still trying to figure out how novelists do it, and when they can do it, whew.
I think that I like to mention Ted Chiang and Ken Liu do some amazing short form, thinking about writing short stories in this speculative form.
Raise your hand.
Yeah.
Yep.
I have a question. I'm trying not to lose the question because there are so many different things that have been said that are just great. Maggie, you talked about premise. And I love the word premise because I've been sort of thinking about not plot but rather engine as sort of the thing that keeps the narrative going. When you think of premise, can you sort of describe it a little bit more?
Yeah.
What you mean by that?
Yeah.
And the second question would sort of be is premise sort of the engine for speculative versus sort of premise the engine for, I guess, realist fiction? Does that make sense?
That's a great question. I'm curious to know what you guys think, but I'll kick us off if it's okay. For me, premise is the engine of speculative fiction. So for my brand of it, yes, that's usually where I start, and it's usually the driving force, and I discover other things along the way, which are really juicy, but that's the thing that keeps me going. And when I say premise, I mean kind of the what if, and then the questions that come after, which you mentioned. So like, what if all the honeybees on Earth die? What happens next? What happens next? What happens next? Who cares about this issue? What do they do because they care about it? Who's fighting them? You know, it's kind of going on and on and on and on, but driven by one kind of what if. And then I think the essential thing is, as Bryan mentioned, to not stop there and just go with your first gut answer, but to really keep pushing that premise and think about who cares about it and what their life is like and what they're sacrificing and what they don't want to look at. You know, what do they not want to see? What scares them? And just going from there.
I love
Yeah, I don't, you know, I think for me, I don't really discern between when I write genre versus realism in terms of premise. I think that in terms of like my genre work, it can be, particularly for my YA children, it can be higher stakes because it's like, it's more of an adventure story, it's more of a speculative premise or fantastical premise than maybe, that obviously I know the settings will be. But I think that idea of like being kind of drawn to the question of what is the what if of the story in any form? Like, what is the thing that this character wants to face? And a lot of times when I was writing, like, what are they facing? Might not be an actual demon, as it is in this story, spoiler, but it will be some sort of thing that can be a metaphorical demon in their life, you know, and what are they going to fight that with, you know? And so I think that's maybe the interest of my stories. What are they facing, or what's the obstacles to getting to the other side of that, whether it's an actual little other side, post-demon fight, or just overcoming, you know, how they deal with grief, how they deal with, you know, what is that piece of the story they're dealing with. But I do think that it's easier for me to think of the premise as a kind of a sentence when I'm kind of playing with fantastical, because I'm often dealing with archetypes, and I'm often dealing with, you know, the ability to be able to put like into a sentence like a 13-year-old girl must climb into her closet to a speculative portal world and, you know, defeat the evil queen. You know, like you can kind of play with, you know, all those points of the story must happen, right? And then my question often is like, what is the character going through at every point of the story? Because I love character, as much as I love world building. And so thinking of how the character is going and being informed by things, being challenged by things in those kind of moments, and that gives the story beyond the kind of just exciting premise for about battling against something, you know, the need of the character for me is always the character. What are they experiencing and how does that feel real to the reader, you know?
I'm going to completely diverge from Material, premise doesn't really excite me anymore, to be quite honest. I've read so much, I've seen so many different movies, I've played so many different games that, you know, if you spend an hour on tvtropes.com, like, it takes a lot of the magic out of whatever you're reading, right? Because you start to see, like, oh, all of human literature is just Legos, right? And it's just the little pieces that we all put together to make different things, you know? And so if someone tells me, like, I have an original premise that no one's ever heard of before, my immediate thought in the back of my head is, you don't read enough, right? Because whatever you're gonna say is probably two things that I have seen stuck together, probably in a new way, but it's not necessarily, you know, and that's why publishing so loves to be like, you know, what are the comps, right? That's what they ask us, you know. How do we sell this to people? Which is essentially like, what are the two things they actually already know of that this thing is, right? So I think of that sometimes explicitly, you know, like the next thing I'm gonna write is another, hopefully, novella in the same world of the thing I haven't even sold yet. That's essentially just, you know, it's just as I lay dying, but in a fantasy world, right? And so The great part of it is, though, that I feel absolutely no worry saying that in front of all of you, because even if every one of you went home and took As I Lay Dying in a Fantasy World, it would be your own version of it, because you have your own stuff, right? You have your own, ingredients and spices and whatever, and the meal you're going to cook is going to be very different than the one I would cook. For me, the engine of fiction, regardless of whether it's speculative or realist or whatever, is yearning, right? What does yearning, right? What does the world want, and what does this person within the world want? And not just want, but can't, right? So there's this. That's where story comes from for me. A lot of people will talk about conflict. I don't necessarily think conflict is necessary for a story. My friend Henry Lien has an excellent book, Summer Bird Comet Asteroid. I'll look it up and tell you in a minute. It's a book about Eastern storytelling modes and how to create a story without conflict, essentially. It's an excellent book, you should really get it. But I don't necessarily think conflict is crucial. I think wanting something that you cannot have, that immediately becomes story for me, in a big way.
It's like what they say in musicals, the I want song. I think I'm trying to learn a lot about how musicals work these days.
I love that.
My answer to that question would be is I probably work a little differently than most writers, where my characters come to me first, and I have like this archetype of a character, and then that's when I started asking the questions of like, what if I took this person and I put them in a world where all the bees died or whatever, or like in one of my published short stories, I started with a character and they struggle with their interpersonal relationships, and then I asked the question of, well, what if it's because they can see when and how people will die? And that's kind of like how it works. So I start with a character, and then I try to just ask myself, what if I put this type of person in this type of world? So yeah. So I think I asked way too many questions, so we only have time for like 2 from the audience. If y'all have any, you up front.
Oftentimes, I'm a huge outliner. Like seriously, it's incredible. Like I might have like a 30,000 word outline sometimes. I intensely outline before I start writing into the world. But you want to keep it exciting too. So some things you might not know as you go into the story, but you'll develop out the story. But like characters, I like to know who the characters are before I start giving long words. It could be like 5 to 6 questions. Like, who is this character? Where were they? Where were they born? Right? What are like traits and like maybe they have sayings? There are things about this character that are quirks that you want to know. Like what is the relationship to the town they live in, to the towns they live in, to their parents, to all the kind of formative relationships in their lives. What is their relationship to the power structure of that world? Who are they in this world? Are they poor? Are they working class? Are they rich? What kind of family history do they have? You want to know who this character. I mean, again, you can write. This is not every writer. This is how I approach it. I like to know who they are in this world because that's how I can tell their story. You don't have to include all that information. One of the things that you're going to learn by kind of pretty much in the editing process as you edit a short story or a novel is that like only certain pieces of the iceberg will appear. Like kind of like the iceberg. All of this information you'll know about the character and the world we live in will be under the water, and only the tip of the iceberg will be above the surface. But knowing this will help you to refine what is necessary for the story. So you're going to want to, and a lot of that can be unveiled piece by piece in dialogue. It's really fun. You don't want to like input on all of it. Like this is her entire backstory in the first 2 minutes. No, that's not exciting to your reader, right? You don't want to weave it in. I like to kind of think about what other characters can draw out some of that information most organically. I like to think about maybe she's going to a certain place, maybe a favorite place she goes in the park. what memory from her last time in the park can draw out aspects of her personality that you can bring up in that setting. So yeah, think of the places, think of the other characters, think of the challenges, obstacles and challenges that can bring out aspects of her personality, and you can weave in naturally in those settings. That's what I think about it. Let it be 5 to 10 basic questions that you even ask in a journalist interview to somebody to know them. Do that with your characters.
Any other questions from the audience? Be right there.
I mean, you talked about it a little bit earlier. It's marketing. It's the rise of how the literary industry has evolved in the last 30 to 40 years. Yeah, how can it be best marketed? How can you compete with other big things in the genre? Everything's always a new Harry Potter. Everything's always a new, like how do you compete to these massive best-selling, multi-million-dollar other series and markets? And for a long time, I talked to like writers who've been in this for a very, very long time. It was restricted because it was like you had to brand yourself a certain kind of writer or to write a certain kind of thing, and it was sometimes hard to move outside of that because you're known for this one thing, and that's because you have to be marketed to a mass audience for that one thing. But again, I think it's changing. I think it is.
I totally agree. Yeah, and I think genre's really made up. It's like something that doesn't exist, but made up things can be creative constraints, and creative constraints can be really helpful for writers. So word count is a creative constraint, right? A prompt is a creative constraint. Responding to a piece of art is a creative constraint. And my writing group actually did a challenge recently. We called it Genre Boot Camp, and we tried to write stories in genres we had never written.
Yeah.
So we tried to do a mystery story in 2 weeks and a romance. I had never written romance before. So hard, but that was really good for my writing. And they ended up being pretty genre-bending pieces in the end, because they showed our sensibilities. But I do think that, for instance, with mystery, they were specifically murder mysteries, and it unlocked my thinking. It forced me to try something totally new that I'd never done. And the very first thing I did was like, okay, I have a dead body, where is it? And my mind instantly, the subconscious produced a thing. So it helped me get over some fear of jumping in, and just the genre constraint forced me to just make some decisions.
So first off, the book that I was trying to remember the title, excuse me, is Spring, Summer, Bird, Asteroid by Henry Lee. Jumping off of what has already been said in terms of the restrictions of genre, genre also, like, yes, it's a marketing thing, yes, it's mostly just, how can you find it in a bookstore, that sort of stuff. Another but, though, is that it also is a thing because we decided it was a thing. And so it has a history, and it has conventions, and if you are not conversant in that thing, it's pretty obvious pretty quickly, right? And you see this, and I can see it all the time when I see like a literary writer, which by the way, literary fiction is just contemporary realism. It's a genre of its own. But when you see a literary writer slumming it for the first time in genre, and I'm just gonna name names, like when Justin Cronin's Vampire book came out, right? And all anybody could talk about was how he had, reinvented genre and like elevated it and whatever. And I read it and I was like, I mean, it's pretty good, but I've read this vampire. I mean, I've read this vampire book before, Like, this is a dude who's writing about vampires who saw Dracula, like, half awake, and then was like, I can do this better. What if they were real in our real world? It's like, what if, my dude, right? And so, like, if you have to know the genre you want to be writing in order to know what's already been done, to know, what those conventions are, to be able to bring your own kind of stuff to it.
And to break them. Yeah.
And to break them, right? So yeah, that's, it is capitalism and just marketing stuff, but it's also really not.
And readers' expectations conventions too. I know there's always in the romance Twitter, social media world, and they're always writing about conventions because romance usually needs a HEA, happily ever after. And so there are some folks who write romance for trying not to write romance, for not writing HEA. That's a big thing, right, in this genre because readers would get upset when they bought a book and it didn't end in a conventional way. All their other romance books that ended. And so it becomes this kind of thing of, well, what are reader expectations? What are the genre expectations? If you're breaking them, how do you let your reader into, to like knowing how you're going to break them in certain ways? It's the industry's funny, but it's just, do your thing and see where you fit. And even if you don't fit, make your own space. Yeah.
All right, that's awesome. So yeah, it looks like we're getting kicked out because we're going back down. So yeah, again, this has been Margaret Sheffer, Bryan Camp, and Desiree Evans. Bye,